Hey folks, Roland here, broadcasting live from William and Mary University here in Virginia. Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for this Thursday, January 31st, 2019. Breaking news, details in the case of Jussie Smollett, the Empire actor who was attacked in a racist and homophobic attack. Chicago police finally have two people of interest caught on a video, and so we'll tell you more about that. Also, last year, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, the only black Republican in the U.S. Senate, scuttled the nomination of Thomas Farr to the federal bench. Well, a group of white conservatives have sent him a letter blasting him for that decision. Well, Scott fired back at them. We'll tell you exactly what took place. Also, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did not have any nice words for a Democratic bill to change voting in the country. Mitch, what's the problem? Are you actually afraid of people voting? We can tell you here what he had to say. Also, folks, we'll hear from Kristen Clark, the president of the Lawrence Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, with regards to these stories. And federal workers are getting their payback, but contract workers are not going to get paid. Chief economist for the AFL-CIO, Bill Spriggs, will join us to tell you why that is a bad idea. Also, a man wearing LAPD gear says white power over and over and flash white supremacist signs. Wait until we show you the video. And if you think cops stopping black drivers are more than white drivers, you're right. And LAPD special unit is under investigation because of racial profiling. Folks, it's a packed show. It's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
All right, folks, Roland Martin here. I am broadcasting from William and Mary University in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I'll be speaking in about an hour for their MLK program here. And, of course, we'll be talking about a variety of issues, including the issue of race in America. This week, that came to us full force when news was reported. Empire actor Jussie Smollett was attacked in Chicago by two white men wearing masks in a racist and homophobic attack. And a rope was placed around his neck as well. Now, yesterday, Chicago police said they combed through hundreds of hours of video and had found nothing showing him on video. Today, different story. They now have released the image we're showing you right now of two men who they say are persons of interest when it comes to this attack on Jussie Smollett. And so we've been following this story. My apologies, folks. We've been following this story here. Now, police are not calling them suspects. Also, so far, there's no video footage of the actual attack. What we do know is that they do see on one video they saw of Jussie with a rope around his neck. Now, we also know that Smollett was talking to his agent, Brandon Moore, on the phone when the attack started. His agent, Brandon Moore, said he did hear this scuffle and heard someone shouting MAGA, but they could not identify who the individuals were. Now, one reporter is reporting that he has two sources who said that Smollett and his manager refused to turn over their cell phones to police. I sent Jussie Smollett a text message to see if that was true. I have not heard back from Jussie as of yet. Now, here's a statement that was put out by Jussie's family. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, our beloved son and brother Jussie was the victim of a violent and unprovoked attack. We want to be clear, this was a racial and homophobic hate crime. Police, again, want the public there in Chicago to identify those two individuals they released that they say are persons of interest in this attack. Also, they say they're still continuing combing through other videotape. They've expanded their zone to see if they can try to find more information on this attack. And so once we get information, we'll certainly pass it on to you. All right, folks, remember we've covered on this show the numerous conservative judges that Donald Trump has been appointing to the federal bench, some of them with strong racial issues. One of those folks is Thomas Farr. He was appointed to the federal bench out of North Carolina. This is the same state where the two current Republican senators blocked two black women who were appointed by President Barack Obama to the federal bench. Thomas Farr is somebody who has a long track record of supporting voter suppression. He was the one who argued the state's voter ID law, the one the federal court struck down and said there was laser-like precision targeting of black voters. Well, Republicans wanted to put him on the federal bench. He came out of committee, but when his vote went to the floor, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina stepped up and said, absolutely not. I've got a problem with Thomas Farr. They pulled his name from that particular vote. Now a group of conservatives, largely white, have sent a letter to Tim Scott blasting him, saying he's doing the work of liberals. Now, here's the piece. They wrote this long letter to him, blasting him for that. Well, and this is what they said. In these difficult days, when allegations of racism are carelessly and all too often deliberately thrown about without foundation, the result is not racial healing, but greater racial polarization. Joining with those who taunt every political opponent a racist as a partisan political tactic to destroy their reputations is not helpful to the cause of reconciliation. This is what Scott said. He fired back. For some reason, the authors of this letter choose to ignore facts and instead implicate that I have been co-opted by the left and am incapable of my own decision-making. Why they have chosen to expend so much energy on this particular nomination, I do not know. But what I do know is they have not spent anywhere near as much time on true racial reconciliation efforts. Decrying comments by those like Republican U.S. Representative Steve King are working to move our party together towards a stronger, more unified future. Earlier today, we talked to Kristen Clark, president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Here's what she had to say about this issue.
Thomas Farr was someone who the civil rights community fought against tooth and nail. He is not someone who deserves a lifetime appointment to our federal courts. And that is because he is someone who has dedicated his entire professional career to defending voter suppression efforts. You'll recall the judicial opinion issued a few years ago that described North Carolina lawmakers as having engaged in discrimination against Black voters with almost surgical precision. Thomas Farr was the hired gun. He was the lawyer who was defending and backing an effort that was wholly condemned by the court. And at every step in his career, he has been someone who has been defending and supporting voter suppression efforts. And this record dates back to the 80s. It dates back to the time where Jesse Helms was campaigning in North Carolina. And at that time, there was an ugly voter suppression scheme that unfolded where the Jesse Helms campaign mailed out postcards to Black voters. And these postcards were intended to intimidate Black voters and threaten them with prosecution if they turned out to vote. The Justice Department investigated, and remarkably, at the 11th hour, a memo was released on the heels of a Senate vote, a critical Senate vote on Thomas Farr. And that Justice Department memo that was developed during the Bush administration described Thomas Farr as the architect and the executioner of this ugly voter suppression postcard mailing scheme. He is completely unworthy of a lifetime seat on our federal court. He was defeated in large part because Senator Tim Scott courageously stood up and said, I'm not going to throw my support behind him, and they didn't have the votes, and he shouldn't be resurrected now.
All right, folks, we're going to go to my panel there. Dr. Greg Carr, of course, the chair of the Afro-American Studies Department, Howard University, and, of course, Joseph Williams, senior editor, U.S. News and World Reports. Greg, here's what's interesting. Here you have Senator Tim Scott, okay, who, look, I said then and I said now, was right when it came to Thomas Farr. And you know what? He's right to fire back at these conservatives who have the audacity to castigate him for this decision. They want to put a man with a racial history on the federal bench, and they are mad that a Black man stood up to them.
Absolutely. One who they have supported, that they've backed. And Roland, you've been making this point now for the last couple of years. They really don't care what Donald Trump does in the White House as long as he is the auto pen signing off on these federal judiciary appointments. This is their gold cup. This is what they're going for. And the irony is, and you remember we talked about this on your show when he was defeated the first time. We knew they were going to bring him back in 2019. And Tim Scott does deserve credit. I mean, the question I have is less what he's doing and more what are these people who signed on to this business doing, including Clarence Thomas's wife, who's always in the mix somewhere trying to lead some kind of rah-rah campaign on something as indefensible as this nomination.
Joseph, I've said that on many other issues, Senator Tim Scott could absolutely be a strong force when it comes to challenging his party on the issues of race. There are some issues where he has not stepped up. On this one, clearly, he studied the record. He met with Thomas Farr and said this man has no business being on the federal bench. And to have these conservatives attack Senator Tim Scott, and so they love touting a black Republican. Now they're mad because a black Republican has rejected their bigotry.
Well, see, this is Exhibit A of why the Republican Party is not really a great home for African Americans. Now, you got to give Tim Scott some credit, as you have, that he is trying to step up when he feels the issue is important. And this is a very important issue for two reasons. You've got a judicial nominee that's going to North Carolina, which is a swing state, very important Republican, very important presidential elections, but also it's a feeder system, and he's getting payback for all the work that he's done on voter suppression. That is the reason why they're pushing him so hard. But this is also an object lesson of why it's so difficult to be a black Republican and why black Republicans are trying to make a move and they keep getting squashed. This is exactly it right here. Tim Scott is fighting the good fight. They don't want to give it up. They're trying to bully him with another intimidation tactic, which it almost makes my head explode when white people try to define what's racist and what isn't. It's really not up to them to decide, especially not up to this group. So you've got an object lesson in how difficult it's going to be. We'll see if he prevails going forward or whether or not they'll be able to force him. Right now, it doesn't look like they'll be able to.
And let me say my final words here to the black folks who are watching. Look, when Tim Scott stands up and does the right thing, I'm going to give him credit for it. See, I need people to understand, Thomas Farr, they wanted to put on the federal bench for life. That man would have been on the court there in North Carolina, covering an area, according to Reverend Barber, that's 40% African American. And so I don't care how you feel about Tim Scott. I don't care if you don't like the fact that he's a Republican. He did the right thing in opposing Farr, and I'm glad to see he stood up to these white conservatives who want to put Farr on the bench, and there are other people who are just like Thomas Farr who they want to put on the bench, and I hope Senator Tim Scott also stands up and says those folks do not belong to have a lifetime appointment. All right, folks, Stacey Abrams, of course, she lost her bid for the governor of Georgia. She has been selected by Democrats to give the response to Donald Trump's State of the Union on Tuesday. Of course, the Super Bowl is going to be in Atlanta, her state of Georgia, and she's going to be in a Super Bowl commercial. Check this out.
Smile.
I'm Republican Natalie Crawford, County Commissioner in North Georgia.
And I'm Democrat Stacey Abrams from Atlanta.
We don't agree on everything.
But we love Georgia.
And want fair elections.
Every vote should be counted from every corner of our state.
We need hand-marked paper ballots and our election officials to have the support they need.
Join us in the fight for election reform. Take a selfie and share your support.
Use hashtag fair elections now.
Because picturing fair elections is something we can all do.
Now, folks, on a national level, as soon as Democrats took over the House, they pushed forward House Resolution 1, which aims to reform campaign finance, ethics, and voting rights, an issue Stacey Abrams, of course, has long championed there in Georgia. Now, here's the thing. The bill calls for automatic voter registration. Folks will have to opt in rather than opt out. It also promotes Election Day and online registration. Now, major issue. Passes the House, goes over to the Senate, and then, of course, Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, little upset. Listen to what this nut had to say on the floor of the United States Senate.
Their bill would make Election Day a new paid holiday for government workers and create an additional brand new paid leave benefit for up to 6 days for any federal bureaucrat who decides they'd like to hang out at the polls during any election. Just what America needs, another paid holiday and a bunch of government workers being paid to go out and work. I assume our colleagues on the other side, on their campaigns. This is the Democrat plan to restore democracy? A brand new week of paid vacation for every federal employee who'd like to hover around while you cast your ballot?
All right, folks, so check this out. The bill would make a federal holiday to voting and would encourage businesses to do the same. It would make universities official registration sites, would outlaw partisan gerrymandering, prohibit voter roll purging, provide more poll workers so lines would not be so long. Kristen Clark, again, we talked to her earlier, the Lawyers Committee. She definitely had something to say about Mitch McConnell and his response to this bill.
H.R. 1 is a powerful bill that is for the first time, Congress focusing its efforts in its first bill on all of the work that needs to be done to repair voting in our country. It's got some strong provisions in there that would fight back against gerrymandering, that would stamp out the ugly role of big money in politics and require that candidates disclose where they get funding from. It would require that Congress commit to doing the hard work necessary to restore the Voting Rights Act. It would restore the right to vote for individuals with a criminal history and render them eligible to vote in federal elections, and so much more. Congress took up hearings this week to begin developing a record analyzing whether or not we need this strong medicine, and we know that it's needed. At the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, we're fighting tooth and nail every day against voter suppression, and H.R. 1 would go a long way in curbing a lot of the ugly abuses and a lot of the ugly voter suppression that we're up against today. My hope is that Congress will keep its foot on the gas and that we'll see passage of H.R. 1 early in 2019.
All right, so Joseph, I want to go to you first. Let's just cut to the chase. I'm going to use in Maine. In Maine, I think was previous year, folks there said they wanted same-day voter registration. Republican Party legislature outlaws it. Didn't ask anybody's opinion. The voters said, what the hell? The next election came back, put it on the ballot, and it passed 65%. This is the example that I'm talking about when it comes to voter suppression. The Republican Party, despite what all these black conservatives say, the Republican Party does not want there to be widespread voting. For Mitch McConnell to stand and say that this is not democratic is an absolute lie.
Well, you've got to admire his chutzpah, right? The same guy who blocked a sitting president from appointing a Supreme Court justice is the same guy who's saying that this is undemocratic. I mean, the irony is just staggering. But it's also not the first time Mitch McConnell has stood in the way of these sorts of reforms. It's also another example. I mean, it's of a piece with the Thomas Farr case, where Republicans know that they're on the losing end of the argument, and if they expand the electorate, they're going to go down in defeat because their ideas are not popular. So if you're in the losing end of the argument, what you do is you try to change the rules. And in McConnell's case, what he's trying to do is stand in the way of opening the electorate, allowing more people to vote, which, after all, is what we're supposed to be doing as a democracy. Everybody gets a chance to vote. Everybody should have an opportunity to vote. And in Europe, voting day in some countries is a paid holiday, and their participation rate is well above 50 or 60%. Ours, we're lucky to get 55% participation. Therefore, that means you've got a whole segment of the electorate sitting out because either they feel like they don't have the time or that it's not going to be enough time for them to cast their ballot. So I want to know what McConnell and others who are opposed to this legislation are afraid of. What are they afraid of? And the answer to me seems kind of clear, that they're on the losing end of the argument and that their ideas will probably go down to defeat unless they restrict the electorate.
And Greg, this is real simple. They know if you're able to expand access to the ballot, that gets more people voting. I'm just trying to understand. Every time I see people talking about our soldiers fighting for our freedom, how in the world could you even stand with a straight face and be upset about saying make a national holiday to get folks to vote. It's stupid that it's dumb that we actually vote on a damn Tuesday anyway.
Well, I mean, Roland, the beautiful thing about the clip that you showed, it really shows that Mitch McConnell was not upset. He had that same unreconstructed Southern smirk that he has had on his face for the past several years. A recent biography of him done by a reporter was entitled appropriately, The Cynic. There was a long feature on him in the New York Times Magazine this weekend, and one of the things that it really showed and described is the fact that Mitch McConnell, from his position as majority leader in the Senate, has undermined the rules of the United States Senate, has turned his back on the best traditions of American democracy, and in lockstep with the fact that he realizes that he is the leader of a dying party with a dying white supremacist old male demographic, he has decided to go for complete and utter broke. He's not upset. He's happy because when he leaves this earth and goes to the grave, he will know that he has done everything he could to defend white supremacy, and he'll go down in history as one of the most counter-democratic leaders in the history of this country.
And of course, we always hear Republicans talking about the American worker, but they actually screwed the American worker by Republicans refusing to grant back pay to contractors. The Senate, the House and the Senate, of course, passed the bill to reopen the government. But the problem is people like security guards, cafeteria workers, and drivers don't get back pay. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts is sponsoring a bill in the House to pay those workers. In the Senate bill, do the same thing. It has 20 Democratic senators as co-sponsors. Not one Republican has signed on. Bill Spriggs is the chief economist for the AFL-CIO. Of course, Bill, we focus on the American worker, courtesy of our folks at AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, one of the partners here for Roland Martin Unfiltered. And it is unconscionable to have Republicans always talking about the American worker, talking about, oh, look at unemployment being so low, and then they want to screw these folks who aren't federal workers, but who are contractors for the federal government.
Well, you know, one of the things is we have that many contractors because in the past Republicans have argued against having these people as public sector workers. If you had grown up in D.C. as I did, guards, the cafeteria workers, all of these were federal workers. During Ronald Reagan's era, we began to privatize those services, and we turned jobs that were solid middle class jobs into work for poverty wage jobs. And so it transformed Washington immediately because it cut off a path to middle class jobs. It's a tragedy that Congress and the president were able to shut down the government, particularly that the Republican Senate refused 34 days earlier to go ahead with what they had passed in December and tell the president we weren't going to go along with the shutdown. And the result was that contract workers were hurt. We don't know exactly how many because we don't know how their companies exactly responded, but just sort of back of the envelope, it's something like 2.6 contract workers per government worker, which would mean we're talking about close to 2 million workers who potentially are going to be affected who lost their pay. We're going to find out tomorrow when the job numbers come out.
Bill,
Bill,
for the folks who are watching, again, when we say lost their pay, the government workers will get back pay. But these workers, so basically for more than a month, they will not get a check. So that means that these people are going to likely be behind on their rent or their mortgage or their car payments, the kids' tuition. That money will not get replaced.
It won't get replaced. It won't get replaced in the economy. The rest of us have to care about it, not just because we should care about abusing other humans, but it's going to hurt. It has hurt the pocketbooks of others as well. But I think you want to be a little careful. You don't want to make it out like, oh, look, we did this for government workers and we didn't do this for these other workers. The government workers were owed as well. What Congress and the president have not done is owe up to the damage they did. This is the issue. So it's creating a hurricane and then acting like you didn't do it. So they're...
Well, first of all, we're familiar with how they treat Puerto Rico and hurricanes.
Yes, exactly. They pretend it didn't happen, and they get upset when people tell them it happened, and then they want to argue about the numbers. We're going to see the numbers, like I said, tomorrow when the numbers come out. The numbers that come out tomorrow are for January, and the week that was January 12th included this shutdown that at that point had already been on for weeks. And while we've had short shutdowns, what has happened in the past is many of these companies would hold on to their workers because they knew that the government would reopen and they didn't want to lose their workforce. In this instance, it went on too long, and many of these companies, of course, could not pay workers for that amount of time without the company itself receiving money. So in some cases, like the ones who were cafeteria workers, it's because no one's going to be going to the cafeteria because the federal workers aren't there. Some of them is because the office wasn't open, so the tech workers, the security guards, those people are directly paid only when the government is open. Their business can't possibly make up for the lost revenue. So there's a lot of revenue that was lost throughout Washington and in those cities that are regional centers for the federal government. People forget Washington is where the headquarters are, but for all of the federal agencies, the majority of workers are outside the Washington, D.C. area.
Right.
So it's a national problem.
Right. Well, absolutely. And again, I would hope that people will be applying public pressure. I would hope that those contractors are going to be calling members of the House and the Senate, trying to get these folks to move because they deserve to get paid with a federal government shutdown that was idiotic from the beginning. Bill Spriggs, the AFL-CIO, I appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks.
All right, folks, let's talk about Chicago, not the cold weather, but a federal judge approving a consent decree to allow federal oversight of the Chicago Police Department. Remember, this is a police department that had numerous issues over the years when it comes to the treatment of citizens. We also, of course, remember the Laquan McDonald case, where the only reason we even know about that was when that videotape was released to the public that showed officers were lying about Laquan McDonald charging towards the officers before he was shot and killed. Jason Van Dyke, a former Chicago police officer, was sentenced to prison as a result of being convicted of second-degree murder. Now, you also recall that Jeff Sessions, when he was Attorney General, did his best to prevent this consent decree from moving forward. And actually, when he left after getting fired by Trump, he made it harder for any future consent decrees because he felt that we don't want to hurt the morale of police officers. Now, damn the citizens, damn the folks that are being abused by cops with police brutality or getting shot and killed. He doesn't care about them. He only cared about the feelings of those police officers. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, from May 2011 through June 30th of this year, the city of Chicago has paid out $418.3 million in settlements and judgments to plaintiffs who filed lawsuits and claims against the city for police brutality. Kristen Clark, the Lawyers Committee, we talked to her and she said, thankfully, this consent decree was approved.
Yeah. Today is a remarkable day because the federal court in Chicago has put in place a strong historic consent decree that will put Chicago on a path to long overdue police reform. The problem of police shootings of unarmed African Americans is a crisis in our country and one that we shouldn't turn a blind eye to. Remarkably, at the end of the Obama administration, the Justice Department released an extensive report, hundreds of pages long, that contained detailed findings about how the Chicago Police Department was broken and identified instances where they used force and engaged in discriminatory practices that harm African Americans and people of color. What did a former Attorney General Jeff Sessions do? He really shut down the Justice Department's work in Chicago and has been obstructing efforts to promote police reform in other parts of the country. And Chicago's kind of a heartwarming success story, because what happened there is the former state attorney general, Lisa Madigan, decided to take the baton and run with it. And she worked with city officials to hammer out an extensive consent decree that puts in place smart, necessary reforms that are going to stamp out all of the problems that have been riddling the Chicago Police Department. The consent decree that was approved by the court requires that they publish data on use of force on a monthly basis. It requires that they tighten their policies on when they use tasers. It requires that they document every instance where they draw a weapon, and much, much more. And all of this work was done with no Justice Department in place. This is something backed by the state. It's backed by the city, and it is something that is necessary and brings relief to the people of Chicago. Every city around the country that's struggling with the police shooting crisis that we face should look to Illinois as a model, look to Chicago as a model for the kind of reform that might be possible in their respective community.
Greg, I want to go back to the importance of federal judges. This was a federal judge who approved this consent decree. This is why Republicans want to pack the federal bench, because they want right-wing judges who will not move forward with things like consent decrees.
Absolutely, Roland, and as I said, you've been making this point all along, and you framed it in terms of generations, as many as 40 years out from now. They know they can't hold the electoral math. They can't. They can count. So they're going to try to lock up the federal judiciary and run their fascism through that way. Certainly, we saw in Baltimore, just after Sessions took over as Attorney General, his attempt to slip that consent decree, slip out of that consent decree. But elections matter. I mean, you've got everybody from state's attorney who we had on the other night, Marilyn Mosby, to federal judges who are not going to go along with that, who are on the bench. And in this case of Chicago, this is profound. It's major, as we just heard from our friend Kristen Clark. They can't do anything about that judge. They'd love nothing more than to switch him out. But in this instance, right is right, and we know that they will receive no support from Matthew Whitaker. They won't get any support from Bill Barr. But ultimately, once you're on that bench for that lifetime appointment, you know, in the federal judiciary, this is for all the marbles. And that's why we have to get out and vote and make sure, because they can't keep doing this. This is how they're going to try to extend their rule.
Mm-hmm. Now, see, Joseph, when I'm listening to all these people talk about, oh, I'm not going to vote unless I see this. Here's the reality. If you sue, when it comes to civil suits, when it comes to criminal cases or things along those lines, you're likely going to be filing in federal courts. If you have a federal judiciary that is filled with 38, 40, and 45-year-old right-wing, mostly white male judges, then you're going to have folks ruling against people of color, ruling against things like this, and that's why who you vote for in presidential elections matters.
It matters. It matters. It matters. You can even go back beyond that, and if you're talking about judges who are 30 and 40 and 50 years old, who are white judges on the bench for a lifetime, you have an absence of history there. You have people who don't necessarily understand what the guy from the labor unions was talking about. The fact that African Americans worked in union jobs for the federal government, that was their path out of the middle class. That's how they made it. That's how they became part of a great generation that helped and shape and build this country through union jobs. And if you have judges that don't really understand that, and who don't understand the legacy of police brutality in the United States of America, and who don't understand that these facts matter to people on the ground, that is not just theory, you really have a dearth of information and a dearth of knowledge that will come to inform these decisions. So I think voting actually absolutely matters a lot more than people think it does, because not only do you have people who you bring people to power who are willing to shut down the federal government and hurt an entire class of people, you have people willing to install judges that will turn a blind eye to police abuse, and you have people willing to install judges who actively promote voter suppression. So voting does matter. You may think it doesn't, but it does. And they're going to try to restrict your vote unless you get out and use it. So that is one of the tantamount reasons that you have to get out and exercise the franchise and let all this other stuff go, because it really does matter.
And again, I'm tired of hearing all these other people. I'm getting all these old stupid, crazy tweets and posts saying, oh, this stuff doesn't matter. And I'm going, you have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Look around.
Because when
look around. I mean, you got to look around and see what's happening.
Every major thing that comes out of this administration is going before a federal judge. Don't think for a second that voting does not matter, because the person who wins determines who gets appointed to the federal bench. All right, folks, got to go to a break. We come back. We're going to talk about some white supremacists in L.A. on the LAPD. Wait until you see this video, folks. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. All right, folks. We want to talk about our partners at D-Herbs. Now, of course, I've been talking about their full body cleanse, which I did, 20-day cleanse. Did nothing but fruits and raw vegetables and nuts. Drank nothing but water. Couldn't have any fried foods, no processed foods. Couldn't even have fish. I ended up losing about 18 pounds. But it wasn't just about losing weight. It was also about cleaning out your system, removing all that toxicity that is in the body, and providing for more energy as well. Now, you want to try their full body cleanse. Remember, they got about 27 different cleanses. Sorry about that, y'all. Allergies are still kicking my butt. They got about 27 different cleanses that you can also try. So what you do is go to dherbs.com, use the promo code Roland. You can also call 1-866-4D-HERBS, 1-866-4D-HERBS. Now, also, what's been the benefit to me is that by being on this cleanse for 20 days, it also changes how you eat and also what you focus on. So by being on the cleanse, look, I couldn't eat anything but raw vegetables and fruits and nuts. And so, even as I travel now, so I'm thinking about smoothies or thinking about different ways to eat. And so it changes just not your body, but also how you look at what you eat and what you put in your body. And so if you want to try it as well, again, I want you to go to dherbs.com, DHERBS.com, use the promo code Roland, or you can call 1-866-4D-HERBS, 1-866-4D-HERBS. Don't forget to use the promo code Roland. And we want you to support, of course, one of the partners who are supporting Roland Martin Unfiltered. All right, folks, let's talk about Los Angeles. Now, we've always known you got some racist cops in L.A. We always know about the chokehold that came out of L.A. But, y'all, check this video out of this cop being on full front Steve King white supremacist.
What's your badge number? Give us your badge number. What's your badge number? That's why you're saying that. What's your badge number? You won't say that. Don't you worry. You won't say that. Don't worry.
Now, the dude was wearing LAPD gear. We don't know if he's officially a cop, but we do hear him saying white power and flashing white supremacist signs. And it's like, really? Really? That's how we roll? But if you also want to talk about racism, go back to the Ramparts division in L.A. if you want to see some real drama. And speaking of that, of course, our folks at the Advancement Project, they have also been looking at what's been happening in Los Angeles when it comes to stop and frisk. In 2015, what they chose to do is, after a surge in violent crimes, they imposed the notion of stop and frisk, doubling the size of their metropolitan division. The metro officers started pulling folks over in unmarked cars, searching for drugs and weapons. And, of course, who did they pull over more? Black and brown people. No shock. Civil rights attorney Connie Rice calls it stop and frisk in a car and she joins me right now. Connie, how you doing?
Can you hear me?
All right, Connie, can you hear me, Connie? Connie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Got it. Yeah, I can hear you, Connie. Okay. So why do you call this stop and frisk?
Well, Roland, let's set the context here. About 3 years ago, there was a surge in gang crime. And we had 53 shootings, 17 bodies. And the mayor said, I want this stopped. I want it doused. I want it suppressed. And so the chief of police doubled the Metropolitan Unit, which is the elite unit in LAPD, specialized units. And they rolled out and they did this sort of, they doused it, but then they kept it with the cars. And it turns out that the stops that they're doing have a really disproportionate racial adverse impact. Now, when I say stop and frisk in a car, on the surface, and this is just the first level of analysis, Roland, because the data shows a big gap. It shows disproportionate impact. 90% of the stops done, 60,000 stops, 90% of them African-American and Latino, vast majority African-American. So you have disproportionate racial impact. The question is why? And why I called it stop and frisk at this stage is that when you have that level of racial impact, you've got to have a really, really big emergency to justify it. And I didn't see it. I'm waiting on more data. I'm waiting on how did they decide which cars to stop? How many times are they stopping the same people? Were these random? Was this a random strategy? Or was it tied to individual investigations of suspects? All of that will tell you whether it was justified or not. So yeah, there's a big gap. There's big impact. When you see this level of impact, you've got to dive deep and you've got to find some very serious reasons to have this kind of impact. Roland, as you know, I say this isn't your grandfather's LAPD. I think Chief Parks and Chief Bratton and Chief Beck and Chief Moore, they've gotten rid of most of the open, flagrant racists. It's not your grandfather's LAPD, but it's also not Martin Luther King Jr.'s LAPD. So let's be clear, we have a long way to go. This is not about individual bias on the behalf of a single officer. This is about structure and policy and the racial impact of a strategy, a policing strategy. And there's a big difference. When I look at the impact of a strategy, I'm not looking at individual bias. I'm looking at what's the justification for going into a primarily black neighborhood and unleashing a strategy that destroys trust, ends up feeling like harassment. African-American residents tell me, look, Connie, I feel hunted. I don't like the way the police are doing their business. Most of the officers doing this, LAPD is majority of color now. So it really isn't the old, even the Rodney King era. We've come a long way since then. But we're now at a level where we're talking about the kind of policing that's done in black communities. And that's what this is about.
And so, final question. You said you're waiting to get that information. Have you requested it? What has been LAPD's response?
I've been all week with the chief, and last night I was with the Police Executive Research Forum, which chiefs of all the major cities. And 20 years ago, you couldn't have had a discussion. There wouldn't have been a meeting. There's a disagreement here. They feel like they've got to do what they call proactive policing. To civil rights lawyers, when you pull a car over and the first question you ask is, are you on probation or parole? In my mind, you didn't have a reason for stopping that car. If you know who's on probation and parole, and if you have criminal conduct, you can pull that person over, or you can arrest them, or you can get a warrant, right? That's the constitutional way. But when you're stopping cars and it's not clear why you're stopping them, and almost all of them are African-American drivers, you've got some serious questions to answer. And we're getting it. We will get the information. We're mapping the data. We're seeing where the high crime is and where the stops are. And we're gonna ask them to roll this policy back and get back to the foot patrols that are done with gang intervention. That's how you build trust. That's how you actually fight crime. And you engage the gang members, not just targeting them and arresting them over and over and over again and making them even more desperate. But what you do is you give them off-ramps out of the gang life. you give the, instead of arresting them, get the ones who actually want to get out of the gang and give them a chance, and deal with the conditions in the community that make this kind of policing, make the cops think that they have to police this way. I have found that if you position police to do real community policing, they'll do it. But you have to demand it, and you have to give them the tools and the partners in the community to do it. We know how to do this. We know how to do it right. We shouldn't be doing dragnets.
All right, Connie Rice, the Advancement Project. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we'll be back and Roland Martin Unfiltered in just a moment.
People mistake their limitations for high standards. Novelist Jean Toomer.
Hashtag HBCU Giving Day. Our school for the day is Coppin State University. Founded in 1900 in Baltimore. Their notable alumni include Stephanie Reedy, Raheem Devon, Margaret Peggy Murphy, Larry Stewart, and Mary Carter Smith. If you want to support Coppin, go to coppin.edu, coppin.edu. Also, don't forget, we want you to also support Bennett College. They have until tomorrow to raise that $5 million. They are very, very close to getting there. They're making that final push today and tomorrow. So we want you to support them. So please go to the Bennett College website where you can also make your donation. All right, folks, many of us are fans of the show Queen Sugar. I know I am. Of course, it is about a black family who is trying to maintain their sugar cane farm. There's a real-life Queen Sugar story happening with a black family in Louisiana. They face discrimination from the banks, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in attempts to run them off of their land. June and Angie Provost shared their story with us at Roland Martin Unfiltered.
I'm a fourth-generation farmer. We was a family operation, and I had my dad and two brothers, and we were close to a 5,000-acre farm. So in 2007, I began to purchase the farm from my dad. So I was pretty much farming solo, close to around 4,500 acres. By 2008, yes.
And I acquired a farm in 2014, a couple of years after June and I got married. I purchased about 500 acres of cane stubble from him and began my...
I actually was nominated for Iberia Parish Farmer of the Year. And also I won high yield for the state of Louisiana. And farming sugarcane is a passion. It's what I love. I mean, that's all I ever did do since I was a little boy. I mean, I wake up, 5 o'clock in the morning, don't get home till 8 o'clock at night, but it was never a job. It was something that we loved doing.
A connection to the earth that's undescribable. Ever since I've met June, he's always talked to me about the difficulties and the struggles that he and his family had to endure, particularly in the mid-2000s to the latter 2000s, 2005 to around 2007 and onward. The intimidation factor was always there. There was always a threat of white growers picking up your land or getting unfair treatment by the bank or by the sugar mill. And that treatment escalated in 2014 when a whistleblower at the USDA led us to collecting some documents. And when we discovered what was going on, treatment towards us became very poor by these institutions. And also within unnamed parties within the community, we've had tractors, equipment vandalized. We've had dead animals put in equipment. We've had equipment shot at. We've had trespassers on our property. And similar to what you read and see in Queen Sugar, we've had, quote unquote, Mr. Landry come and try to purchase the farms at an unfair price in a very bullying aspect. So, I mean, that treatment and problematic behavior by a racist, systematic industry here in South Louisiana has led us to, endure some pretty difficult times.
I did a calculation from 1983. I mean, there have been at least 60 African-American farm families that have went out of business. You're not talking about individuals. You're talking about farm families.
Yes, and within those farm families, there are individual farms. So
I mean, and that's a shame. I mean, there was a community of African-American farmers.
Yes.
I mean, that's all we thrived on sugarcane. I mean, this is what a lot of the families over here did.
Yes.
And to say that many African-American families have went out of business, it's a shame.
Yes, and you talk about the wealth lost to communities. You talk about, I'm not talking about a big house or a fancy car. I'm talking about real, true wealth and health. I'm talking about bookstores, grocery stores, decent jobs, schools, healthcare. So those are the things that are lost to communities like ours when we're forced out of business by systematic racism. Currently, we are not planting any sugarcane on our farms. Currently, what June and I are doing now is we collaborated to create Provost Farm LLC. And what that is for us to get our hands back into the dirt, to get back to farming, and grow cane for producers or manufacturers who are creating cane juice, syrup, things like that, organic products and non-GMO products. We currently have a GoFundMe page that we are promoting to get Provost Farm LLC up and going. It's at Provost Farm LLC Cultivate Equity. Cultivate Equity is sort of our hashtag that we use to sort of reparations and restitution for our farm.
I want to bring in Greg and Joseph here. Greg, we hear people who talk about we need to have land. But there's a difference between having land and you're trying to make money off of your land. Here's an example of some black folks who have land but who are facing rampant discrimination. We've seen this for years in the Department of Agriculture, where basically where white farmers treat that as their own personal piggy bank, and we've had black farmers who've had to sue in order to get paid.
That's exactly right. And with the federal shutdown, I can only imagine some of those same farmers now trying to go through the bureaucracy and navigate through our winter, perhaps even colder than ever, to do everything from feed and shelter their animals to preserve, their machinery. And this just makes it even much harder. I mean, that's heartbreaking, to hear the provost talk like that, and to realize that all the millions of acres we've lost throughout the South and elsewhere, all the black farmers with a much belated, although we are glad John Boyd and them saw it through, settlement with the federal government. I'm reminded on the 100th birthday of Jackie Robinson today, but it would have been 100 years old when he wrote in his autobiography, when he was born, he never had it made. At the end of his life, he never had it made. And somehow these black farmers persevere. So we not only wish them well, we have to tell this story over and over again. And I'm glad you're bringing it up today once again, Roland.
Joseph, again, when we look at what they are dealing with is what we often talk about on this show, which folks are in denial, is that there are systems that oppress black folks. And then when you talk about when you have banks, when you have the Department of Agriculture, when you have all of these different entities that are involved, have that impact. In fact, also, we had a note here that the provosts are also suing, I believe, the bank as well. I'll have those details in a moment. But Joseph, we're talking about systems.
We are talking about systems
that are against people who can't financially fight systems.
It's systems. I mean, and your previous guest from Advancement Project talked about how the LAPD is a majority minority now. That is a system. They are exercising systemic racism. This is what it looks like. The farmers, the provost, systemic racism, where you have a community of farmers they're part of. They have a legit right to do what they do on their land, but white farmers allegedly feel differently. Systems, they have to go to court to try to get their case resolved or to get the law enforced to keep people from harassing them, to keep banks from cheating them, to keep processors from cheating them. What do you do when you go to court? You go before a judge. You know, that judge is part of the system, and if that judge comes out of a racist system, he's less likely to give them a positive result. So it all interconnects, and it goes back to the single act of defiance that we have as African Americans, which is the vote. And it's so important. It's important now more than ever, almost, you could make that argument. But even so, you still kind of scratch your head when you hear the story, and you wonder, what year is this? Is this 1930? Is this 1977? Yep. Why are we still fighting these battles? And it's because the systems have not yet been dismantled that keep these kinds of fights going.
And again, June and Angie Provost are now suing First Guarantee Bank, alleging that they were treated differently than similarly situated white borrowers. The bank denies the charges. We'll keep you updated on that particular case. Greg and Joseph, I appreciate both of you joining me today on the show. Again, folks, I'm here at William and Mary University in Virginia, about to do their MOK event here. I'll be broadcasting tomorrow from Miami, of course, where I'll be there for the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. Thank God I'm not going to be freezing. And so looking forward to that. Folks, don't forget, we want you to support Roland Martin Unfiltered by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Joining our Bring the Funk fan club. Every single dollar you give goes to support this show and bringing you stories like the Provost story, because we know other networks are not going to be covering these type of stories. That's why we are here. So go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. All right, folks, I got to go. Y'all take care. Holla. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.